Why do you think the removal of Saddam hasn't improved the lives of Iraqis? Or has it? I don't know.
Well, I think if you really want to know the truth about the invasion of Iraq, there's clearly some incentives for the invasion. Oil, securing oil was one of them. Establishing permanent military bases in the region was another one. But a far less talked about reality is Israeli plans, which made clear that the Balkanization of surrounding countries, in particular Iraq, if we go to Oded Yanan's plan for Israel in the 1980s, it lays out very clearly a strategy of destabilizing all of the surrounding areas of Israel. This includes Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and even Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
Allahu Akbar!
And this long-term goal is part of the Greater Israel Project. So in terms of the sectarian divide you see happening in Iraq today, it's actually all part of a very well-designed plan to try and secure the goal, this fantasy goal of the Greater Israel Project.
Okay, but why would Israel benefit from an unstable Middle East, an unstable Arab nations? Because what we see that this instability actually is followed by fundamental Islam. And people who are overthrown
indeed, yes,
are either replaced by fundamentalist powers or there's just more sectarian violence that grows.
Yes, and it would seem on the surface from a sane point of view that everything is going wrong. But in fact, when you fracture a country along sectarian divide, ultimately you weaken the country. What the last thing that Israel or the United States wants is a strong Nasser-type leader, an Arab nationalist who will seriously ensure that the resources of that country are taken and protected and used for the benefit of the people. That's the last thing that the empire wants and that Israel wants. So while you have these religious fundamentalist nutcases who are running around bombing and doing all sorts of stuff like that, you have a weakened, fractured country in Iraq, and that is the prerequisite for ultimately expanding Israel into the fantasy of the Greater Israel Project. It doesn't seem sane, and it's not sane, because those who are trying to carry out these agendas are pure and simple psychopaths.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Nearly 16,000 American troops have been injured in battle since they invaded Iraq 2.5 years ago. 90% of the casualties happened after Americans were told it was all over. The image presented to the nation was of a victorious commander-in-chief.
My fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Today, an army of 150,000 is pinned down in the war. They outnumber and outgun the enemy, but they're still taking terrible losses.
These people are heroes. 18, 19, 20-year-old people whose lives are forever altered. We ask them to do this for us, and that is hard. That is something that makes you lose sleep at night when you let yourself think about it.
Medical staff at Landstuhl always watch the news from Iraq to see who'll come through their door the next morning. A second influx of wounded, that's 22 today, and the whole process swings into action again.
Real terms, but for the Israeli army, our relations with the United States is the most important strategic asset for our security. Shall not endanger it. I think Iraq is on the line. I think for the time being Saddam Hussein is showing an unbelievable patience and restraint, but it is not in its nature. It won't hold water. And look, I know there are much criticism about the desert operation, how was it called? Desert war? Yes. Look, if the Americans would not intervene, I'm telling you, I believe from knowledge, that Iraq would today possess a nuclear bomb. Don't take it lightly. A crazy man with a nuclear bomb can become one of the greatest dangers.
Just after dawn, a plane arrives at an American military base in Germany with the latest casualties from Iraq. The American public rarely see images like this. The government has suppressed the true cost of the war. But the numbers are now so high that Americans have started asking, is it worth it?
Mark, I'm the chaplain. You're here at the hospital. We're going to take good care of you. We're praying for you.
At Landstuhl Hospital, the critical cases come off first, typically with brain damage and limbs blown off.
Julius, I'm the chaplain. You're here at the hospital. We're going to take good care of you. We're praying for you. Tyrell, I'm the chaplain. We're going to take good care of you here. We're praying for you.
Back in Iraq, the troops are involved in a much publicized new offensive, but this is the unseen side of such operations.
James, I'm the chaplain. We're going to take good care of you here.
Thanks, sir.
We're praying for you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Ryan, I'm the chaplain. We're going to take good care of you here. We're praying for you.
Thanks.
Justin, I'm the chaplain.
How you doing, sir?
We're going to take good care of you here. We're praying for you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Jared, I'm the chaplain. We're going to take good care of you here.
A little block here. I'm injecting some marking. Okay. The metal is back here. right back here, and we took that out. I don't see any more metal. It's got some broken bones there.
We've been investigating how the American government has tried to hide the numbers and ban the pictures that show the reality of war. But casualty levels are now so high, they can't be disguised any longer.
Okay.
Most of these injuries are caused by shrapnel from roadside bombs. The wounds are dirty and ragged. The immediate risk is infection.
Jessica, Dylan Naslund was 25 years old when the anxiety and darkness of his post-traumatic stress disorder proved to be just too much. His legacy, PTSD awareness.
It may look like a regular family home in Galva, Iowa, but look closer and you'll see the sorrow, feel the grief, and hear the message.
If you're a soldier or someone in need calling, leave a message and we'll call you back.
This was the home of Dylan Naslund, a 25-year-old Iraq and Afghanistan vet, lover of life, his family, and America.
Just anything outdoors, and hunting and fishing and four-wheeling.
On our Sunday fun days, we call him, he was our social director. We didn't know what we were doing until Dylan showed up.
He dreamed of being a soldier his whole life, and at 17, Dylan entered basic training camp. He was deployed twice, and things seemed okay. That was until he came back from his tour in Afghanistan.
Something was affecting him, and he just wasn't the same.
There was overwhelming just sadness, I think.
He did seek treatment and was on medication, but months and months of darkness turned into a moment of finality for Dylan. He shot himself in the chest in his car on December 10th, 2012.
It became the worst day of our lives.
Since then, it's been heartbreak for his family. While they're happy Dylan is finally at peace, their fight now consists of preventing other soldiers from being at war with themselves while here at home.
He was 25 years old. This is his story.
The family filmed a documentary appropriately entitled Dylan in memory of their fallen hero.
Dylan and I are going to feed him.
The documentary works both as a healing tool for the family and a way to spread awareness about PTSD.
Let all these soldiers and let families know, again, you're not alone. Please reach out and get help. Your life, every life, is worth living.
The Naslunds are working on spreading the documentary around Iowa. In the meantime, you can go to this story on our website for some helpful links for you or someone you know who's suffering from PTSD.
It was one of those things that's like recommended to you on the side, where it's like, you know, if I were a smart Marine, I would I'd have an AK or something in my vehicle just in case, you know, somebody accidentally gets killed, you know, I wouldn't get in trouble for it because, oh, well, it's obviously an insurgent, he has a weapon, so you're in the clear because you killed an insurgent.
When we arrived there, they gave us quite a few AKs, and they said, keep them in case something happens. And that was about it. It just went from chain of command down to us, and it actually was pretty much everybody on the base.
When mistakes were made, we carried drop weapons. These weapons right here were taken from the Iraqi police back during our first deployment. And this is just an example that we would take their weapons and carry them around with us in case we did mess up and shot the wrong person.
I've heard numerous circumstances of civilians getting killed, and then you know, soldiers and Marines subsequently placing weapons on their bodies or placing wire on them.
We would photograph all the people we killed, and in the photographs there would be the object, either the shovel or the AK-47, and that was proof enough to protect the individual soldiers from getting tried for any sort of crimes.
But I do want to ask you, now here's another thing that we both agree that there's been a jump from a lot of the Jewish community from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, because you think it serves the state of Israel being very well served by the Republicans. But here's a quote that I took out of your book, and the neocons are in charge of that process within the conservative ranks. You say that self-deception and rationalization are central elements of Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy.
Well, yeah, it comes up at times, and other times it's not. I mean, I don't say that Jews are always self-deceived or always rationalizing, but I have a chapter in my books, Separation, and it's just condensed the one on anti-Semitism, just going over historically, looking at all the apologia, all the rationalizations. I mean, because Jews, you know, as a minority group, they've had to deal with Christian ideology. You know, certainly within Christian theology, Jews had a certain subservient role to play. Well, you have to get around that. You have to have rationalize your particular theology. So it's been a part of Jewish thinking forever. If you look at over history, look in the Talmud, you look in Jewish writings, they've been concerned to justify themselves, to sort of make sense of their position in the world. And a lot of times, from today's standpoint, it's pretty easy to see it's rationalization. It doesn't make any sense, but it serves its purpose to rally the troops. But you still see it today. You know, you still see some of that. I don't know that that's centrally involved in neoconservatism. I think that neoconservatives have been fairly upfront about the fact that Israel is a very high
but let's say they're going to war banging the drum, stop terrorism. So
yeah, well, yeah, we see that. That is for public consumption. I think that there is a lot. I mean, and there's a sort of official. Quite a few people, including myself, think that the philosopher Leo Strauss, that was one of his, his principles, that it was okay to tell lies for a good cause, and so we see propaganda and so on. But I think that the main Jews behind these things have not been self-deceived. I think they've known what this is about. It's possible. Who knows? It's hard to decide between deception and self-deception sometimes. But whatever it is, Paul Wolfowitz, for example, he may talk about terrorism and this and that, but it's easy to find a paper trail of his deep commitment, socially, personally, intellectually, his close relationships with Israeli generals and political figures and all that. If he says he's not interested in Israel, then he's really, that's just.
But how do you explain the complicity of America's, non-Jewish political establishment, leadership, whatever, from the president down, with their going along with this campaign of at least partial deception?
It's an amazing thing that's going on here. Certainly, when you had 9/11, it opened the door. It allowed people to do things that they didn't before. And people said that, like Paul Wolfowitz said, without that, they wouldn't have been able to do this. But you've had, and I think you have to look at some certain non-Jews. In this case, Dick Cheney. I mean, he's critically important to the success of the neocon thing. Without him, I don't think it would happen. And he was involved in staffing the Pentagon, say. So the reason you got not only Rumsfeld, who also is not Jewish, but you got Wolfowitz, Pearl, Feith, all these other guys. Well, Pearl's not, but the point is that these were the guys who staffed the lower levels and produced this war mentality. Like many people, I don't think George Bush is really, in charge of his own administration. When it comes to this thing, I think that he's been pushed in this direction by Cheney. And so one of the things about the Jewish intellectual movement, another trait, is that they have always had non-Jews recruited. If you look at the left, they've always recruited non-Jews. I have a little footnote in my chapter on the left where I was recruited when I was a student to give a talk about how, why someone from a small town in Wisconsin would become a political radical. But it was obvious I was very different from the rest of them. I wasn't Jewish. I was, But and if you look at psychoanalysis, you have people like Ernst Jones. If you look at Boasny,
he was the Gentile face on psychoanalysis.
Yeah, he was a Gentile face. And Dick Cheney sort of.
What about Gus Hall? Did Gus Hall fill that niche in the communist movement here in the United States?
There were a whole lot of leftists like that. They were constantly being brought in to have very visible positions in leftist movements.
So the Jewish nature of the.
Yeah, but if you're a Jew and if you want to appeal to non-Jews, what do? You don't have a lot of Jewish people. You have sympathetic non-Jews, and that was true in the Soviet Union. That that non-Jews who liked Jews, got along with Jews for one reason or another, made alliances, were brought in these movements. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why non-Jews are going to do these things. You know, ranging from deeply held personal beliefs to, you know, it's certainly good for their career. I mean, you think about someone, if you get into this neoconservative group, you know, you're going to have major outlets in the media. Your books are going to be published. You're going to be reviewed in the New York Times. Everything's going to be wonderful. But I'm not saying that Cheney's like that, but he has a long association with his neocon think tanks going back 20 years. This is not something that just happened. And if people have been paying attention in the year 2000 in this election, which I wasn't, but if people have been paying attention, they would have noticed this. You know, that Paul Wolfowitz was in line to be the second in command at the Pentagon. You know, that's huge, because if you knew Wolfowitz, you'd know what was going to happen.
Now, a question we've obviously, now I want to move to more contemporary issues. Of course, we're at war right now. To what extent are Jewish interests, we already covered this
I've just written a long thing
being
about
furthered by a war in Iraq? We're getting low on time.
We're getting low
on a 1 to 10.
Okay, well, the main thing is that you know, this is the work of the neoconservative movement, and at the very center of the neoconservative movement, you have you know, these very important think tanks. The American Enterprise Institute is perhaps the main one, but also the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. You have AIPAC. You know, you have the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, but then you have you know, the very important figures in the media, you know, like Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard.
But what about even the mainstream, all the mainstream publications from the New York Times down? Don't they kind of sanitize?
They certainly do. They certainly do.
And make acceptable the idea of Zionism, which is basically very much like what we once decried in South Africa. They kind of make it acceptable. I mean, is it that pervasive?
There's a consensus, but let's talk about neoconservatism. I think that the main influence of neoconservatism is within the Bush administration.
Right.
You know, you have this support group of media, think tanks, and all that, but the main people are people like Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, Abrams, Elliot Abrams, Shulsky, and so on. In other words, these are the people who are pushing the policy
today. But let's face it, if it goes to the other side, we're going to see war coming from the Democrats. That's my last word.
Okay.
Kennedy,
I wouldn't doubt that.
We're out of time. It's been splendid having you with us, and I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Flashpoint.
And the other thing that I find deeply offensive about it is it contains a very old anti-Semitic canard, which is that the Jews, this scattered little people around the world, have these occult powers and are pulling the strings of the naive and duped non-Jews. And it wasn't that long ago that those kinds of beliefs led to hideous things.
One of the reasons I left the Soviet Union is that I cherish freedom of debate. And my book, it's a history of Jewish opposition to the Zionist idea, which I think is a perfectly legitimate subject. For some people, it is not. And I'm surprised because this happens in the midst of free societies. On every issue, we have freedom. On this issue, Soviet-type behavior takes over.
Since the publication of his book, Rapkin has received death threats. Academics at other universities have refused to debate him, and old friends have stopped speaking to him. He has been barred from many synagogues in Montreal and has been denounced from the pulpit as an enemy of the Jewish people.
I think it has to do with the success of Zionism. Zionism has succeeded in creating a new identity for many Jews. They are Jews because they support the state of Israel, right or wrong. For these people who hold to their Judaism only by means of the state of Israel, of course the subject should not even be discussed, because it questions whether in fact they're doing something Jewish, and that's why when someone questions it, like the protagonists of my book, that provokes remarkable hostility.
I'm here today to defend Judaism and to oppose the Zionist state. The Jewish religion does not include a forced retaking of the land of Israel, the dispersion of the native population, the oppression of the native population, the flouting of international law. The Jewish religion is against all of those things. And the Zionist state is for all of those things, so I cannot be on the other side of the street.
Our prayer is one for the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of this rebellion against God, the state of Israel, that is the root cause of all the bloodshed and suffering.
الحمد لله لا اله الا الله لا اله الا الله احنا مؤمنين بالله الحمد لله احنا مؤمنين بالنبي.
My grandmother died in Auschwitz. A lot of members of my family died. 24 people died so far we found. But they were not killed by the Palestinians. And it just seems to me so heartbreaking that Jews, who are supposed to have a value of justice, are doing this and acting in this cruel manner towards other people.
Not all Jews are Israel right or wrong. That there are Jews who want peace and justice with the Palestinians. And, we don't think of us as a monolithic voice. Don't be afraid to criticize Israel. Like, we're Jewish Canadians. We criticize Canada too. We're not disloyal to Canada. It's patriotic to have a voice for peace and justice. And to be in solidarity with Palestinians is not denying my religion as a Jew.
Zionism emerged as a revolutionary movement. Of course, when you foment a revolution, you provoke opposition. And one source of opposition was a religious source. And I don't mean Orthodox. I mean both Reform and Orthodox and others for whom to be a Jew is a religious concept. It's not an ethnic, it's not a racial, and it's not a national concept. Jew is a person who somehow relates to Torah and to commandments. For Reform Jews and Orthodox Jews, interpretations of Judaism are vastly different. Yet both rejected Zionism because for them there was no religion in Jewish essence and Jewish identity. My Jewish education came pretty late in my life. I was about 32, 33 here in Montreal when I started getting interested in what it means to be a Jew. So I started reading books, and I realized that what characterized the Jew throughout history was a certain relationship with the Torah. So I started reading up, and what I came up with was appreciation of the moral values and the solidity of Jewish ethics. The tremendous moral tradition of Judaism has been largely obliterated by those TV images of Israeli tanks in Ramallah and so on. And again, I'm not saying that tanks should or should not be in Ramallah. What I am saying is that it has very little to do with...
Back in 1997, a group of Washington heavyweights, almost all of them neoconservatives, formed an organization called the Project for the New American Century.
Inside this building, behind this door, is the brain trust that some suspect has led the U.S. to the brink of war.
Included Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, Robert Zoellick, John Bolton.
10 are now in the Bush administration. The letter to Mr. Clinton was, in essence, a preview of arguments that would have a more receptive audience 5 years later. That letter argued the case for a comprehensive political and military strategy for bringing down Saddam and his regime. A 76-page white paper circulating for a year and arguing for an aggressive U.S. foreign policy suddenly gained new relevance. In the blueprint, it says the process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
Donald Trump has just committed the United States to an endless quagmire in Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. And Trump's rationale is the same one that has been in force for the past 16 years, which is that Afghanistan was somehow responsible for the attacks on New York and Washington on September 11th, 2001. It's kind of amazing how this gift on 9/11 keeps on giving. And Trump is the last person one would normally have expected to do this. When Trump was running for office, he was skeptical about foreign wars, open-ended engagements. He recognized that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have destroyed America's economy and infrastructure. But what's more, Trump is also a 9/11 skeptic. On September 11th itself, Trump immediately said that there must have been explosives used. He said there is no way that a plane could possibly take down these buildings. And he was right. As architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have proven, thousands of architects and engineers are on record having put their careers and livelihoods and reputations on the line to state that what happened to the 3 skyscrapers, including Building 7 on 9/11, was clearly controlled demolition. So the official narrative of hijackings led by people who were supposedly being commanded by a guy on dialysis in a cave in Afghanistan are utterly ludicrous and have been fully disproven on hundreds and hundreds of grounds. And yet this Zionist coup d'etat on 9/11, it was a combination of Israelis and neoconservative Americans, along with hardline right-wingers in the American military and intelligence establishments who pulled off this coup d'etat, this Reichstag fire in America. And now Donald Trump, who has expressed skepticism about all of this in the past, who drove Bush out of the presidential nomination by attacking Bush, his brother, as the likely culprit, or at least someone who was responsible for 9/11. Now Trump, who we all hoped might be an irresponsible truth teller, that is someone who would tell the incredibly subversive truth about what has really happened to America since the false flag attack of September 11th, those hopes are now dashed. Trump is clearly under the control of these elements of the deep state that murdered 3,000 Americans in an act of high treason on September 11th, 2001. So those of us who care about truth and care about the core values that made America great in the first place are now going to have to view Trump, as well as the rest of the American leadership, as treasonous enemies.
It was a beautiful sunny day. The morning preceding the attack, there were 12 overflights of Israeli aircraft observing us, very friendly.
Ernest Gallo remembers the day like it was yesterday. Not too different from any other service day, but he says all that changed when from a lower deck he heard an attack coming from Israeli forces firing upon the USS Liberty from the air and sea.
All of a sudden, Israeli aircraft came out of the sky and started strafing and bombing the ship. And the attack was in 3 phases.
On June 8, 1967, Gallo says 34 U.S. servicemen died in the attack. Another 174 were wounded. They were honored over the weekend during a wreath-laying ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. The Israeli regime paid nearly $20 million in compensation to the victims and the U.S. government since then. However, survivors say there has never been an extensive investigation as to what happened despite numerous letters sent to lawmakers. This year marks the 46th anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty. Veterans and survivors of the attack traveled here from all over the country. They say this is an important issue that more Americans need to know about. Several U.S. politicians were invited to come to the ceremony. None attended. Some say that the true details of what happened were covered up by the president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, but are still ignored to this day.
Very angry. I'm getting disgusted with it. I was only 19 at the time. Now I'm 65. I'm getting disgusted. You won't find it in the history book. If you do, I wish you'd let me know.
Other veterans say that the United States is not acting in its own best interests, where money to foreign wars has overshadowed much-needed domestic services.
It just seemed like we too often placed the interests of other countries, especially Israel, above the interests of our own country.
Like the brave men who kept the Liberty afloat after the attack, veterans like Gallo say they will continue to push for the truth to be known on that fateful day.
I was very upset that our supposed to be our ally would be so vicious to try and sink the ship as hard as they did, and they got away with murder.
One observer noticed that the wreath commemorating the USS Liberty only remained in place for a few minutes before it was replaced by another wreath from a different entity. Colin Campbell, Press TV, Washington.
You know that perception that Israel is a poor, persecuted group of people that everyone's just being a bully against and has done nothing wrong to anyone else, and that they're a poor, persecuted minority? Yeah, I don't remember that being true either. Well, anyway, the California State Assembly has decided that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitism and is now encouraging educational institutions to follow suit and accuse anyone who criticizes Israel in any way for crimes they actually committed as being anti-Semitic. Here's an example of what now constitutes anti-Semitism. Language or behavior that demonizes and delegitimizes Israel. Speakers, films, and exhibits that indicate that Israel is guilty of heinous crimes against humanity such as ethnic cleansing and genocide. Describing Israel as a racist or apartheid state. Student and faculty-sponsored boycotts, divestment, and sanction campaigns against Israel. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. Applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Actions of student groups that encourage support for terrorist organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah. So basically now, according to the California State Assembly, you can't criticize Israel at all. In fact, you can't actually take any crime that state has actually committed and criticize them for it. Basically, Israel's free to break every damn law that exists, commit every crime that could possibly exist against humanity, and you can't criticize them for it. I think this is absolutely ridiculous. And this would thoroughly debunk the notion that Israel is the victim somehow. You know, the one receiving billions of dollars from the world's superpower and everybody else kissing their ass in order to kiss the US's ass. yeah, I'm pretty much just throwing the journalistic analysis right out the window and just going for it, because this is goddamn ridiculous. This is just completely stupid. Language or behavior that demonizes or delegitimizes Israel. Israel is a racist, hate-filled, genocide-causing, religious fundamentalist psycho state. Good. Now lock me up in California. Films, speakers, or exhibits that indicate Israel guilty of heinous crimes against humanity, such as ethnic cleansing and genocide. Well, I don't have any footage, but you can just take any footage from Operation Cast Lead, which was basically an outright slaughter of the Palestinian people. Describing Israel as a racist or apartheid state. Israel is a racist and apartheid state. Well, I'm not a member of any educational institution, so I can't do the next one. Denying Jewish people their right to self-determination. They have no right to self-determination in Palestine. No, not in Palestine. They don't have it. If they wanted it, they would have gained more legitimacy by not being a bunch of genocidal psychopaths. And they are. This is about the extermination of the Palestinian people based on what it says in the Torah, a religious text. A religious text should not be regarded as a legitimate source of anything, and which is one of the great hypocrisies of Israel itself. Israel has the greatest population, the greatest percentage of population that professes to being atheist and not believing in any religion, yet the entire idea of Israel is based on what it says in the Jewish Holy Book, making it not only a genocidal and apartheid state, but a massive hypocrisy. The state of Israel is one gigantic hypocrisy. And that's true. Go ahead, California, do something about it. Now, applying a double standard by requiring Israel a behavior that is not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, like not committing genocide against the people there. Just an example. And, okay, more stuff about student groups, but I'm not a student, so this doesn't apply to me. I mean, this is in the realm of complete ridiculousness. This isn't even just this isn't a journalistic work anymore. This is just a rant. I mean, this is insane. Israel, who lives with their boot on the neck of the Palestinian people, are supposed to be poor and persecuted, and that they're the victims of all of this, while they literally roll through and murder the entire Palestinian population on a daily basis, and take more land and more land and more land in violation of how many UN resolutions. I mean, this is ridiculous. Do you know what happens when you do this? You basically just take every anti-Semite, every person who thinks everything is a Jewish conspiracy, and just hand them everything that they could want to say. That's exactly what you're doing. And that's exactly what this is going to do. This in itself is going to promote anti-Semitism. Not that, you know, generally speaking, people who are racist against Jews generally give any bit of a damn against Palestinians. But I mean, this is ridiculous. You're literally taking away the freedom of speech, not even the freedom of speech, the duty, the obligation to criticize a state for doing something illegal. That's exactly what this is. And you can't portray this as absolutely anything else. You literally can't criticize the government of Israel for mass murdering the Palestinian population. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is insane. For people who think that the Jews run America, this is enough for them for that. This is how ridiculously, religiously fundamentalist the United States is. I mean, this almost wouldn't happen anywhere else, but I'm sure this is actually supported by a lot of countries, including my own Canada, and including many countries in Europe as well.